Nothing is going right for Evelyn Wang. Her business is failing, her husband is clueless, she can't emotionally connect with her daughter, and the arrival of her ailing, disapproving father reminds her that her life has been nothing but disappointment. She daydreams of all the trajectories she could have taken instead of being stuck in a stagnant marriage, running a barely functioning laundromat. Her attempts to chase those fleeting dreams have sunk her finances, and now she is being audited by the IRS. However, the fate of her business quickly becomes the least of her worries, when she is pulled into an interdimensional war against an all-consuming evil, waged by alternate universe versions of her family. That's the elevator pitch for Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And yes, the Daniels, that is Scheinert and Kwan, proudly wear the Matrix influence on their sleeves. The sterile, monochromatic office aesthetic, boundary-pushing fight choreography, and of course a heady sci-fi premise with a sharp philosophical edge. Act 1 is beat for beat the first Matrix. Our protagonist lives out the drudgery of their life, mostly unconscious, with only brief flashes of lucidity that let them know something is fundamentally wrong. They're guided by someone plugged in to their world via a mobile command center, who wakes them up to a much larger reality than they could ever conceive of. The first attempt is a bit of a non-starter, but our hero eventually taps into a long-dormant potential that thrusts them into the world of consciousness. For both Neo and Evelyn, this awakening is less existential and more tied to the enlightenment of Zen Buddhism. That topic is a little outside my range, and you can find countless essays and videos on how the red pill represents Satori, or how Neo's arc embodies the Four Noble Truths, or hell, hear Lana Wachowski herself yammer about it in the Matrix video game of all places.
You see, at this point in the story, Neo stands on the verge of Satori, ready to resolve the paradox of choice and choicelessness, of free will versus fate, but that can only be achieved through an act of surrender, which occurs after he has abandoned the perspectival nature of truth, accepting the totality of present consciousness, which ultimately allows an evolutionary transition, transcending the Cartesian dilemma through the emergence of delimited spirit, which then provides the world with a choice of a third path, the path of me, or the path of key.
Moreover, the point is that Neo, through the red pill, and Evelyn through tapping into alternate universe selves, open up the floodgates of near infinite possibilities. They reach a potential that was inside them all this time, and they kick an inordinate amount of ass while doing it. But while The Matrix devotes an entire 2-hour movie to get to that point, Evelyn's ascendancy to Kung Fu Ubermensch is only the first act. The rest explores unsettling existential questions, better than the Wachowskis' sequels, with greater clarity, humanity, and just more inventive, balls-to-the-wall fun, which, considering the sobering subject matter, is quite the feat. Absolute negation is therefore not consummated by suicide. It can only be consummated by absolute destruction of oneself and others. Albert Camus, The Rebel. The film's villain is Evelyn's daughter, Joy, or rather a version of Joy from the world where Evelyn discovers the multiverse and invents the machine that allows people to experience parallel versions of themselves. Evelyn pushes her daughter and the machine beyond their limits to experience, wait for it, everything, everywhere, all at once. As a result, Joy's consciousness is fractured across the multiverse, and she takes on the persona of Jobu Tupaki, a godlike Looney Tunes being seemingly hell-bent on annihilating all the verses in a bagel-shaped black hole.
Everybody got that? Good!
To continue the Matrix parallel, Jobu seems like a take on Agent Smith in Revelations, a mirror to the hero who undergoes the same awakening, but instead of embracing an enlightened, forward-thinking perspective, emerges as the embodiment of destructive, juvenile nihilism. Her loud, theatrical attitude, her explosively flamboyant dress is all a parody of wild, edgy, attention-seeking youthful rebellion, one that Joy may have been denied of when she was an actual teenager. She is the id of the always-online smartphone generation, exposed to a constant stream of stimulation and information. For the politely homophobic Evelyn, Jobu is her worst nightmare. Her frumpy, normal lesbian daughter fully coming out as a queer demigod who doesn't conform to Evelyn's ideal of straight respectability. I'm sure there are layers of queer reading to Everything Everywhere that, once again, is out of my lane. So let's circle back to the core of Jobu's colorful nihilism. Perceiving the vast multiverse of possibilities in its completeness, Jobu meets the absurd condition head on, in all its chaos, meaninglessness, and cyclical disappointment. But as Evelyn discovers, her daughter is not mad. By contrast, her mind is extremely lucid of her futile condition. French philosopher Albert Camus describes the feeling of the absurd as the divorce between man and his life, the actor and his setting. Or as Wayman, quoting the one-hit wonder band 9 Days,
"Something is off. Your clothes never wear as well the next day. Your hair never falls in quite the same way."
In other words, we reach out for inherent meaning and purpose in the universe, and find a total lack of it in the world around us, or at least of which we humans can perceive. The result is a vague and elusive sense of alienation and anxiety, the kind that has defined the last half-decade of fractured post-truth culture. Jobu, Evelyn, and by extension large swaths of Western society foster a nostalgia for unity, both in tangible and metaphysical terms.
Our institutions are crumbling. Nobody trusts their neighbor anymore. And you stay up at night wondering to yourself, how can we get back?
Is the question that drives Evelyn through the first part of the film. How does one return to a perceived past where there was still hope, and the universe seemingly made sense? Evelyn bounces between verses much in the same way one flits between fads, fandoms, and belief systems in our world, hoping to form some kind of meaning out of the collective informational noise we accrue in our brains. She views Jobu as a malevolent force to be exorcised out of her daughter, and that becoming as powerful as her omniscient enemy, she may return everything back to that status quo, that nostalgia for simpler times. However, the process sends her veering away from reconciliation, towards annihilation.
Feels nice, doesn't it? If nothing matters, then all the pain and guilt you feel for making nothing of your life goes away.
There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Is how Camus begins his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. And through all the confetti, Pixar parodies, and anal insertion, it's the same problem that ultimately defines the conflict of everything everywhere all at once. For Camus, suicide is the method one uses to escape the absurd, as to engulf oneself in death also negates the terms of the absurd. It brings silence to the discomforting noise of daily existence. Jobu's Bagel is the very essence of suicide, a swirling void of endless nothing, that nevertheless offers some semblance of comfort. If nothing matters, all the pain goes away. The secular form of the bagel is the motif that binds the film together, from the very first shot of a round vanity mirror reflecting happier times. Joy herself is introduced staring into the spinning blackness of a dryer cycle. Deirdre, played frightfully frumpy by Jamie Lee Curtis, sketches a circle in black ink onto Evelyn's tax form, and it becomes a sort of identifying totem used by her alternate verse self. Jobu's philosophy is distilled in the very shape of the bagel, its endless edges representative of the cyclical disappointment she finds in every universe. The center is a big zero, a void that nullifies her pain. But the thing is, Jobu doesn't want to destroy every version of her mother. On the contrary, her quest is to find at least one Evelyn who sees what she sees and validates her feelings instead of shutting down or deliberately eluding the issue. These dark, uncomfortable thoughts that Evelyn herself has, but refuses to acknowledge. We see that play out at the beginning of the film. Evelyn sees the despair in her daughter's eyes, the same sense of never being good enough that she herself felt from her own father. But instead of a moment of mother-daughter unity over her shared experience, we get this.
You have to try and eat healthier. You are getting fat.
The film has been praised for how it captures the immigrant experience in America, and immigrant parents expressing their love not in tender affirmations, but in disapproving fussiness is definitely part of that culture. Though I think in the specificity of the Wang family, the Daniels strike a chord among a much broader demographic. Once again, we return back to that word cyclical, a generational cycle of families letting this darkness fester inside them without an empathetic release, before it destroys them from within. Like existentialism, it's a heady theme that has dominated mainstream culture, due in no small part to the pandemic opening those wounds up. I mean, have you ever stepped back to think how weird it is that We Don't Talk About Bruno was a #1 hit? But merely possessing that empathy, feeling at your very core what another person feels, is not enough. Our hunter-gatherer brains are ill-equipped to cope with a world that demands us to be consciously present at all times to all things. That stress broke Joy, and at the film's midpoint it breaks Evelyn, as it has broken so many people during the pandemic. For all the interdimensional shenanigans, the concrete stakes of Everything Everywhere All at Once are centered around a familiar image from the last couple of years. A small business on the verge of collapse. Each day brings something new to despair over, and the challenge of post-pandemic life is to resist the call to abandon any thought of the future and join the ever-growing chorus of collective insanity, to become unfeeling and unconscious. As her world crumbles around her, Evelyn takes the form of a rock in a universe where the precise alchemy for life never formed. In fact, most versions of Earth are like this, a vast quietude that after 90 minutes of full-throttle hyperactivity feels for a fleeting moment like pure bliss. Away from the noise and bullshit of modern existence, Joy and Evelyn are finally on the same wavelength, remarking on how greater scientific discovery only serves to make us feel like smaller or stupider pieces of shit. Camus speaks of this failure of universal reasoning to quell the absurd. I realize that if through science I can seize phenomena and enumerate them, I cannot, for all that, apprehend the world. Everything is ordered in such a way as to bring into being that poison peace, produced by thoughtlessness, lack of heart, or fatal renunciations. Even as a rock, however, Joy pushes towards annihilation, beckoning her mother to follow. Cut back to the laundromat, and Evelyn watches as her goofy husband Wayman wildly gesticulates, trying to resolve their troubles with the IRS, seemingly only exacerbating the situation, as he always does. But something inexplicable happens. Deidre, the beleaguered face of an otherwise faceless bureaucracy, a woman who pridefully calls herself a bitch, grants them leniency, another chance to untangle their tax debt. All because Wayman showed her kindness through a box of almond cookies. Living is keeping the absurd alive. Keeping it alive is, above all, contemplating it. The absurd only dies when we turn away from it. One of the only coherent philosophical positions is thus revolt. That revolt is the certainty of crushing fate. Without the resignation that ought to accompany it, the revolt gives life its value. Across the infinite versions of himself, Wayman is consistently defined by his kindness. Okay, he does break the noses of a few unsuspecting security guards who are just doing their jobs and didn't expect to run into a martial arts badass, but this is a story about imperfect people. It really can't be overstated how much of a revelation Ke Huy Quan is in this film, both in terms of his physicality, he has experience as a stuntman, and raw pathos. The Daniels casting of Quan both reclaims an iconic Asian actor boxed out of leading parts because of Hollywood racism, and toys with the kinds of kid roles he played in the 80s. Quan plays Wayman as one would imagine Short Round all grown up, almost childlike in his upbeat attitude, regardless of the situation. Evelyn loves Wayman dearly, but ultimately views him as a person who lacks a certain awareness. That's why him dropping the divorce papers in the first act comes as a shock to her. But this goofy, terminally optimistic man actually sees the stagnation in their marriage with absolute clarity, and has the will to do something about it, even if it means bringing it to an end. This moment parallels another version of Wayman, in a verse where both he and Evelyn become independently successful in China, after they break up at a young age. It's a scene where the waterworks were let loose for a lot of people, as in spite of being materially better off, Wayman still wistfully imagines a happier life with Evelyn, just running a laundromat with her. But the line that got me, the one that resonated with my own outlook on the world, comes right before that.
你觉得我很软弱是吗？多年前，我们刚开始谈恋爱的时候，你爸总是觉得我的心太软。也许当时他是对的。你说过，这是一个很残酷的世界，我们都在里面绕圈子。这我明白。你和我都在这个地球上活了这么久了，我总是看到事情好的一面。那不是因为我天真，而是必要，而需要。这也就是我的生存之道。
Wayman is not just merely the heart and soul of everything everywhere all at once, but the philosophical core of the film. A rebuttal to the you don't matter, nothing matters mantra of Jobu and Evelyn. The word fight is specifically used to parallel Evelyn's physical prowess. But I would describe Wayman's kindness as a conscious, directed act of rebellion against the void. It's much more than just blind optimism and eluding the problem in search of hope, what Camus called philosophical suicide. Camus' rebel is critically without hope, ever cognizant of their futile condition, but because of that can take a broader scope of their life and live it to its maximum. What counts is not the best living, but the most living. Like his wife and daughter, Wayman acknowledges the swirling, hopeless nothingness of the bagel. However, he refuses to either elude or surrender to the despair. Instead, he draws a certain strength from it, a stubborn defiance, manifested in the only way he knows how: unconditional kindness. Whether it's going above and beyond to help laundromat patrons, making Joy's girlfriend feel welcome in his own home, being the voice of empathy even while fighting an interdimensional war, or just befriending a lonely little girl in China. Wayman's be kind mantra borderlines on the trite and the profound, but his persistence to be kind, even knowing the effort might be ultimately meaningless, is what makes him the quintessential absurd hero. Evelyn becomes that hero herself by rebelling against an increasingly impersonal world through what can only be described as empathetic kung fu. It's taken me way too long to mention the utterly divine Marcell, because what other superlatives are left for her? She started off as a trained dancer, then applied those skills to become an action superstar. The climactic atrium sequence in a way brings her career full circle, a graceful dance that doubles as a screenwriting textbook example of setup and payoff. A bullet becomes a googly third eye, and the chaotic swirl of the bagel is countered by the symbol of ultimate consciousness and empathy. Evelyn uses every version of herself to heal even the most mundane, everyday antagonisms. The intense choreography, the heavy visual effects, and Jobu's constantly shifting outfits made this the most challenging sequence for the Daniels to film, which I gotta respect the filmmakers for putting in so much work just so they can get bound, gagged, and spanked by Marcell. There's something very truthful about the final showdown between mother and daughter in Everything Everywhere All at Once. When Evelyn has her big Matrix line at the end, it doesn't immediately save her daughter from the abyss. Instead, the story crashes back down to reality, an underlit laundromat parking lot, where she does the hardest thing a parent could do to their child: let go. The act of surrender is frightening, both in terms of the bagel annihilating Joy in one universe, and Evelyn possibly severing a relationship with her in another. Nevertheless, it's an acknowledgement of personhood that I wish more stories about parents and children were honest about. Evelyn can't control the decisions Joy makes, especially the ones that bother her as a mother, even if they're self-destructive. But what she can do is be present, be conscious, understanding, be loving with arms wide open whenever her daughter needs an anchor point in the chaos. The nature of unconditional familial love, in its own weird way, embodies the absurd. He who loves the most regrets the most. And yet the most irksome aspects of our loved ones bring a certain passion to our lives, one that makes the happier experiences stand out all the more in sharp relief. Those specks of time when both the world and our desire to be with people who can be emotionally taxing suddenly becomes clear. For the Wang family, love in all its shortcomings and contradictions is their revolt against a senseless, unfeeling universe. The phrase "we can do anything, nothing matters," once a surrender to the abyss of negation, becomes a unified declaration of absurd freedom by Evelyn, Joy, and Wayman. Camus illustrated the absurd condition through the mythic Greek figure Sisyphus, the mortal who cheated death by chaining Hades himself. For his passion of life, Sisyphus was punished by the gods with the eternal task of pushing a boulder up a mountain before it rolls back down at the end of the day. His torment is not so much his labor, but the knowledge that in the end it's all futile. And yet, as he heads back down the mountain to fetch the boulder, he is triumphant in that his mind is still lucid and inflamed with scorn for the gods. Now, I wouldn't describe Evelyn at the end as scornful, but what separates Everything Everywhere All at Once from a lot of trite, wishy-washy, hope punk fiction is that the protagonist's condition is never fully resolved. Her finances are still a mess, and she can't seem to focus with the millions of voices calling her from the multiverse. It took me way too long for my Concerta-medicated brain to pick up that this movie is also a huge allegory for ADHD.
Evelyn, did you hear me?
Sorry. What did you say?
Yet she continues to push that boulder up the mountain, knowing that there is likely no reconciliation for it at the end. She concludes that all is well. This universe, henceforth without a master, seems to her neither sterile nor futile. Each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain, in itself forms a world. The struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a person's heart. One must imagine Evelyn Wang happy.